It is 8:01, so why don't you kick us off with our land recognition?
You bet. Let me just share my screen. So welcome everyone, and let's start off today with an acknowledgement of the beautiful space that we live in. So SAIT acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Métis Nation in Region 3, and all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And this sacred gathering place provides us with an opportunity to engage and demonstrate leadership on reconciliation, and we're grateful to live, work, and play in this beautiful space. That's a lovely shot of Heritage Hall.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, so we are back to continue talking about conflict. We did this probably 6-7 weeks ago now. I can't believe it's that long back. Time has lost a little bit of meaning over the last couple of years. But we had a lot of questions left over to answer. We had a lot of engagement in this topic. I'm wearing my shirt that's in full-on conflict mode today. But maybe a great place for us to start, Gina, is to kind of go back and just revisit some of the initial concepts. And folks, as we go forward here, as always, please do throw your comments in the chat. If you've got specific questions you want to pose about conflict or handling conflict, resolving conflict, using conflict productively, throw your questions in the Q&A, and we will do our best to address them as we move on. But Gina, why don't we just kind of start with the basics on conflict, and then we can get into it.
Yeah, you bet. Well, first I want to say thank you, especially for the folks that were with us in March and you've logged on again today. We're going to do a little bit of a recap, and thank you for the folks that are new in this session. So we talked a lot. We covered quite a bit last week, or pardon me, a couple months ago. And so we talked a lot about, what is conflict? And when we think about conflict and understanding conflict, conflict can be a source of pain. It can be uncomfortable. We naturally we might avoid it. And a lot of us think of conflict as negative and, again, scary or ugly. And typically we deal with conflict in one of three ways. So we either avoid it, hope that it might resolve itself or go away. We might face it and handle it well, which is wonderful, or we face it and handle it poorly. And so all of us have had the experience of learning, we learn what works by what doesn't work. And again, with conflict being naturally uncomfortable, we can also start to shift the way that we look at conflict. Focus conflict on the problem, not the person. And when we think about teams, when teams have a foundation of trust and vulnerability-based trust, to be specific, conflict becomes an attempt to find the best possible solution in the shortest amount of time. I'm going to share a slide here as we continue. And so conflict, really, when we think about the last conflict we've had, what was it about, and what did we make it about? Typically conflict, and again, we talked about this before, it's much like an iceberg. We might stay in our position. And so our position is that piece above the ice, on the top of the water there. And really what's going on is a difference in some of these things. Maybe there's a difference in knowledge, a difference in needs, a difference in interests, perceptions, and so on. And with leadership and leading through conflict, leaders spend a lot of time resolving conflicts, up to 24% of their time. And that's from a Gutman study from 2014. And thinking about what conflict is, it's often the difference between what we see and what someone else sees when we look at the same thing. Conflict is rarely about getting the facts right. It's, again, about those conflicting perceptions, needs, wants, values. That's a big one. And when we reframe conflict, I'm a big believer in a reframe, we shift how we approach it. And so here's a slide and a quote that I love, Wayne Dyer: when we change the way we look at things, we look at change. So seeing opportunities in conflict, looking at it through that healthy lens, an opportunity for growth for the team, growth for us as leaders, all of us are leaders, and growth for us as individuals as well. One more slide and then I'll stop sharing here. Seeking first to understand. Stephen Covey, when we seek first to understand that other person's perspective, conflict will diminish. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with the other person's part or the other party's point of view. It simply means that let's understand where someone's coming from, getting curious. Oftentimes as leaders, we often want to rush to solve the problem as opposed to understand really what's going on. So that's a little high level overview. I figured I was going to try not to talk as much so we could get to more questions this time.
That's great. No, it's a great overview, and you triggered a few things for me right off the bat. I'd be curious as we progress here and just to get some chat going, folks, I throw your common sources of conflict in the chat. I'd really love to get a picture of that. There's a few things that you touched on here, avoiding versus facing it. I suppose there are times where avoiding it does make sense. We can maybe touch on that. I love the focus on the problem, not the person. It's a very, we talk about that a lot. I think it sometimes becomes very difficult, especially if you're in a team setting and you're seeing one person as the problem. Maybe there's something there that we could dig into. But the last thing that you talked about, and I know this is my Achilles heel and really the place I sometimes struggle, is trying to jump to solve a problem versus listening. And I'd be curious, maybe we can start there because I'll take advantage of your expertise. Strategies to avoid that, right? Because you're right, as a leader, you really do, and whether it's leading at the office or leading at home, you do want to sometimes just jump in and solve so you can move on. So first question will come from me is, how do you avoid that? How do you actually take the time to pause and try and understand?
Well, I think you almost just answered your own question. It's pausing, taking that moment to pause and understand really what's going on, right? Because we're so quick. I mean, we do this as parents, we do this as leaders, right? I just want to solve the problem. Let's move on. Let's keep going. And when we do that, we might miss out on some really good pieces. We might miss out on some of those unmet needs, wants that aren't being discussed, right? If we just solve it. So in terms of not rushing to solve the problem, getting curious. Again, when I think about empathy is mindful curiosity, right? So what's going on for that person? Maybe they're making it about, this process change, but is there more going on? Is there more going on? So asking the right questions.
Yeah. You just, it's something else that just came up here in the chat, and I'm loving some of these comments, folks. Process change, organizational change. It seems change is often a very big source of conflict. Michael's got a great comment here about, and this is, I think, another piece that plays into this, is sometimes it's important for the leader not to solve all the problems or the conflict, right? And how do you push that back to the group to take on those pieces? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, again, is it a minor conflict? If it's a minor conflict, if it's something that's happening just between two people on the team, is it something that can be worked out? And or is it spreading into the rest of the team? Is it becoming an issue? Because if we avoid it and we don't assess or address it, and it starts to spill out, of course, that becomes very toxic. And that can be a big issue, a bigger issue for the team. So finding the balance between, is this something that can be resolved? Someone can resolve themselves, or as a leader, when do I need to step in? Right? When it starts to become personal, we need to step in.
Yeah.
Right. And as leaders, we have person A says this, person B says this, and they're both coming to you. And so your person C and how you respond is really, really important, because as person C, if we buy into what's going on or take sides or, maybe overshare, that can obviously create more conflict. But as person C, when we get curious and we actually stop and help coach the other person. So what is this issue really about? Is it about the task, or is it about something that's frustrating you about that person? Yeah. Building from there. So.
Yeah, I often look at that, it's, for me, there's always three sides to every story, right? your version, my version, and what actually happened.
That's right.
Right. And it's, you know, it comes back to that comment you made earlier about facts versus perception.
Yeah.
And I think that one, it is especially in that case where you've got two different people coming to you with different sides of a story.
Yeah.
Is how do you, and I don't know if you've got any ideas, strategies for how do you help understand what individual perceptions are versus the facts?
Great question. Something I have done before, and I've seen this work very effectively for others as well. Create a list. Here's my story. What's your story? So story is part of perception. My story is Craig doesn't like me. Craig is mean to me. Craig is right. Craig doesn't give me all the best jobs. So here's my story. Here's the facts. Craig didn't say good morning to me.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a fact, right? Here's another fact. And then if you start to look at it, say, all right, so how much of this is my story and my perception, and how much evidence have I continued to collect to make me right versus what are the facts? And so I've done this on my own in conflict, and then even as a leader helping others go through this process. When you take a look at the facts, it's all right, so these are different questions. These are different things I can address now because I have facts, and it's less about that story.
Yeah. Yeah, like again, for me, it's interesting too, because it seems to always come back to this essence or this idea around speed to resolution, right? And I don't, there's something to tease out in there, I think, is because we seem to have gotten into a place where you got instant messages, you got emails, you got notifications popping up, and it's like everything has to be solved
Now.
Now or yesterday.
Yeah.
And how do we get out of that? And again, I know I'm going to answer you're going to say I'm going to answer my question again by simply pausing, but I don't think it's just that simple, right? Because we're messy. People are messy things, and trying to, become somewhat clinical about implementing a pause all the time. So I don't know. Maybe I'm beating this horse to death, but.
I'm going to share another slide.
Okay.
Well, two slides. So taking a look at this one, just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong. We haven't seen life from my side. And so there's that piece on getting curious, but this is the slide I really wanted to focus on. So this is from emotional intelligence, when we kind of marry EI with conflict, because it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to manage conflict, and that starts with self-awareness. So taking that time to reflect on, what do I want for myself? So again, even as a leader, what do I want? What do I want for others? What do I want for my team? Do I want them to keep coming back to me with every problem, or do I want them to feel like they have autonomy, that they can resolve some of these things on their own? What do I want for the relationship? And how would I behave if I wanted these results? And this is that piece about getting out of our comfort zone, right? How would I behave? Maybe I need to listen more. Maybe I need to understand the values of each of my team and really see what's getting triggered. I love this, right?
Yeah.
Knowing your people. We often talk about the golden rule, and the golden rule is treat others how you'd want to be treated. Well, we use the platinum rule, and the platinum rule is treat others how they like to be treated. And again, knowing your people, creating that space for voice, recognize and appreciate and celebrate the differences that come up, because this is how we get better results, stronger teams, and better productivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's so the comment you make about taking the time to get to know your people is huge, and I think we've talked about this before in the space over the last 2 years, how difficult that has become, especially if you have new people joining your team in a remote or hybrid kind of environment. Very challenging, I think, to be intentional about it. Right. And so on. So there's some great comments, great questions here. Platinum rule. You're getting lots of shout outs for the platinum rule. So that is great. But I'm just scrolling back to a question here From Brian, how can I as a manager mediate conflict between others on a team? Is there a framework or resource for guiding a conflict conversation between two other people? Great question.
Really great question. And it's the first thing I will say, and I mentioned this several times in March, is you're the expert of your world and you know your people best. So you might approach this, you know, in a different way depending on your people. But I think about the 5-step, the interest-based conflict management model. And first step is preparation and pre-work. Right, so preparing yourself, understanding what's going on, understanding the players in the conflict. So preparation and pre-work, and then we move into creating a collaborative atmosphere. So maybe that's having a conversation if it's just 2 people on the team, bringing them each individually, understanding their perspective, understanding their story, understanding what the facts are, and then again, bringing them together and having that conversation. Zeroing in on the issues, right? Be soft, hard on issues, soft on personality, right? So understand what's going on, really narrow that down, zero that in, and then start to brainstorm options and agreements, right? So how about we try this on for this week? Why don't we try this process and see if that improves? It's obviously much easier to manage conflict when it's specific to the task. It's a little muddier when it's about people and it's about personalities, right? So again, that's where I would go back and default to finding out what are the values, what's being compromised, why, what's that, instead of the person being so positional, you know, what's their position about, what's their intention, what do they need? And seeing if we can find common ground. Right? At some point, we should be able to find common ground. We're on the same team. We just might have very different ideas on how to get there.
Yeah, one would hope. So I like that. It's the 5 steps yet. I was writing them down here. So prepare, collaborate, zero in on issues. I love that. Hard on issues, soft on personalities. I think that's a huge takeaway. I heard brainstorm. I missed the 5th one because I was busy writing the first 4.
Options and agreements.
Thank you.
Options and agreements. And so with that, you know, once you get to step 5, and we go into depth in this in our conflict management course, step 5, you know, when you think about, to me, the most important step in the interest-based model is preparation and pre-work, right? What do I need to do to prepare? Thinking about this conversation, thinking about who I'm having this conversation with, what judgments, assumptions do I need to dump out and release? So preparation and pre-work, very, very important. If we're spending all of this time getting ready for this, and I don't like to call them difficult conversations. I think when we say difficult conversations, when I hear the word difficult, I want to avoid that. I don't want to step into a difficult conversation. I will step into a learning conversation. So even a reframe of, we're going to have a learning discussion. This is a great opportunity for us to find out what's really at the heart of this and how we can work better together. And so if we're spending all of this time, again, preparation, pre-work, zeroing in on the issues, or creating a collaborative atmosphere, zeroing in on the issues. But the last step, options and agreements, make sure you schedule a follow-up meeting. You know, if we've spent all this time getting ready for this learning conversation, and then how many of us have had this discussion and then never talk about it again? Okay, good, right? We think superhero cape, right? I've solved the problem. Leader came in.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We don't have to deal with that one anymore.
Yeah.
You do. You need to make it important enough where, all right, at the end of that session, 2 weeks from today, you know what, 3 of us or the 5 of us or whoever's involved in the issue, we're going to go grab a coffee, sit down and see how we're doing. If it was important enough for me to prepare for this and us to have this discussion, we need to follow up. So that is step 5, options and agreements.
That's great. Yeah. So again, and Lynn, I see a question there. Preparation, create a collaborative atmosphere, zero in on issues, brainstorm, options and agreement. And then step 6 is schedule the follow-up.
Yeah, we're kind of looping. It's a 5A, I suppose.
There you go. Another question here. Sorry, the chat is scrolling by. So if you can, please pop your questions in the Q&A. Does a vacuum of interpersonal connection leave the door open for interpersonal conflict? Leaders can foster a healthy interpersonal team environment. It's kind of the statement to that. So thoughts?
So if I'm understanding the question, so conflict within the team, will that spill into interpersonal conflict?
No, I think it's the other way. Is there, if there isn't any interpersonal connection, like, so if you've got a team probably with loose connection, does it perhaps leave the door open or create an environment where you're going to see more conflict? And James, please correct me if I've interpreted your question wrong. So, but does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
If I don't know you, so if team members don't have a lot of social capital, they haven't built up that social capital, they don't really know each other as people. And again, this isn't about being nice and chummy and having to spend time outside of work. It's about just understanding someone's values, where they're coming from. Then we might be quicker to judge. We might be quicker to form an opinion on someone. I mean, we think about how long does it take for us to form an opinion on someone? First impression, not long, right? How many of us have been wrong, right? And so with that, if we don't know each other, then yes, I would say then that it's more likely that there could be some conflict there, albeit it might be underlying, right? Maybe we don't have enough safety, enough trust to even talk about it. So what's interesting with conflict is if it's not being discussed, it's being acted out. Right. So if I have a toxic working relationship with Craig and I have a wonderful working relationship with Jenny, and I open up my email on a Wednesday morning and I have emails from Craig and Jenny, whose email am I going to check first? And so I'd
probably check Jenny's first too.
Yeah. I hope Jenny watches this, watches the replay. And by no means, we do not have a toxic working relationship. It was just an example. But if it's not being discussed, it's being acted out. So in that case, if there's not enough social capital, if we haven't built that trust, that psychological safety, inclusion safety, then again, there might be underlying conflict, and yeah, that can spill over into a bigger issue. So I think it's really important as a leader is build social capital. Yeah.
And Shar, you've got a great comment here about with respect to social capital, maybe start projects with a meet and greet on a more informal basis to understand each other better. And yeah, again, I'm going to come back to the last couple of years as well on this hybrid remote blended type environment now. And you've got people who have started during this period, and yeah, it's an extra step. I think leaders need to be really intentional about trying to figure out how to build in. And again, it goes back to this whole comment around time and speed to results. You sometimes rush these things because you got to get to work. Yeah. You got to get to, You got to get to the doing. Question from Eileen. Are there practical strategies on how to handle conflict with individuals on another team? Example, your person on your team who is having conflict with someone on another team. So I can see I can see where this could potentially get into how's the relationship between the leaders on these teams as well. But yeah, thoughts on that. I think some of the frameworks are probably still going to apply that you talked about, but maybe there's some nuance here.
I would say for sure, Craig, a lot of the same framework does apply, right? Is there a common ground? Maybe there's competing priorities, right? You're on different teams, but getting to know that person, understanding, again, who they are, what their values are, talking about expectations. So in the last session we had in March, we talked a lot about the communication agreement. I'm a huge fan of the communication agreement. And the communication agreement is wonderful if you're starting a project and already, if you've been working with a team for quite a few years, still very, very valuable. So what do you expect from me? What do I have a right to expect from you? right? Talking about those expectations. And then questions 3 and 4, what will you do if I fail to live up to those expectations? And question 4, what do you feel I have a right to do if you fail to live up to mine? Of course, you can word that in a way that's, yours. That was just the framework in that particular COM agreement. So understanding, again, what do timelines look like? I think getting rid of the elephant in the room, right? We do this little dance where we pretend everything's fine. And then, we walk away and we might be frustrated. We didn't say what we wanted to say. And so, starting a conversation, and I've done this more than once, our working relationship is important to me. And I want to just, draw some attention that it feels like we both had some energy around this latest project.
Oh, that's a good, I like that. Sorry.
Energy is a neutral word.
I
right?
like that.
Yeah. And energy isn't good or bad. We both have some energy around this, right? If I started off with saying, I want to talk about this project because we're clearly not on the same page. Whoa, well, I'm going to have my defense up. Well, what do you mean we're not on the same page? Instead of, hey, you're important to me. This working relationship is important. We both had some energy around this. Let's talk about it. And then maybe that's when you go through the steps. Maybe you also find out about the person's conflict style, right? We talked about conflict styles, 5 conflict styles. And with that, maybe you're an avoider, and maybe the person's a competing style, and they just want to get to the root of the issue. And yet you're going, whoa, they're way too aggressive. I need to avoid them. I don't like how they speak to me. I'm not prepared for this. I'm not mentally ready for this. So understanding someone's style and realizing, much like DISC, right? Are they a driver style? And are they looking for those results versus someone who might be that steadiness style and they are more amiable?
That's interesting one, because I think often it's these styles that can lead to a perception of conflict, right? Especially if you have somebody who is very direct, that's just their normal way of speaking, right? Yeah. And somebody who, to your last point, is more amiable. Maybe throw the conflict styles up.
I was just actually looking for the slide. I love the conflict styles. I learned a lot about myself when I first took conflict management. Well before I worked at SAIT, I went to SAIT and took this course, and I had this huge eye-opener. And so the 5 styles, again, competing style, avoiding style, accommodating, compromise, and collaborate. And we are capable of using all 5 styles, and we do. What we do have is usually a preference or an approach to a certain style. And it's not to say that you're married to these results, right? So you have these styles. If you're mindful of making changes and you're mindful of how you handle conflict, then it can change over time. But really, it's about the right approach to conflict within a team. So, when I think about competing, if it's an emergency, if it's a crisis, if it's health and safety or compliance, as a leader, no, there's a right and a wrong. There's a competing style. That's it. No, if it comes to needing to buy some time, I want to buy myself some time. I need to get calm. Maybe I need to calm down my emotions. Maybe I need to gather more information or data. Then avoiding is acceptable, as long as you're not avoiding it altogether, but maybe, avoiding it for a bit of time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, compromise, we've learned throughout life to compromise. And compromise is when you need to find that middle ground, when you need to balance and maintain that relationship. And of course, accommodating, if the issue is more important to the other person than it is to you, it's okay to accommodate. And ideally, where, a long-term solution where the needs of both parties are too important to be compromised, that's where we want to collaborate. And with teams, we will, depending on the conflict, we want to step into that collaboration space because we're working together, hopefully for a long time. Right? So get at the root of the issue, find out the value, find out the unmet need or want.
I like that. Maybe, and because I know, I'm sure, knowing this group, if you can repeat the 4 questions in the communication agreement, Because
Sure.
we did have a question from the last time. So if you want to just touch on those 4 questions.
I was gonna say I can bring it up, but it might take me too long to find it. So, what do you expect from me?
Yep.
What do I have a right to expect from you?
Yep.
What will you do if I fail to live up to your expectations? And 4th question, what do you feel I have a right to do if I feel or think that you're not living up to my expectations?
Okay.
And
Perfect. Go
just
on.
adding, I just one piece on that. I found, so when I would do this with teams, again, I would do this as a one-on-one and not at performance review time. This is a separate conversation. And some of the data, some of the information I learned from that was incredible. I had one employee say to me on question 3, what will you do if I fail to live up to your expectations? She said, Gina, I'd probably avoid you for a while because I hate conflict. And I'll send you an email because I'm way better at putting my thoughts through an email. Oh, okay, that's good information. And if I didn't know that, and then I received an email out of the blue.
Yeah.
So this is a really good conversation because that email did come. And when I received it, I went, that's why she didn't return my call yesterday.
There you go. Actually, you just triggered another question for me. Can you resolve conflict by email?
Ooh, ouch. Well, I'm going to throw it back to you. Have you ever resolved conflict through email, Craig?
It sounds like you just had a situation that was.
Yeah,
right.
True.
It's been in all seriousness, right? Because there is no excuse right now for not being able to have a conversation or have a conversation like this, or have a conversation face to face. But if you have individuals who aren't comfortable in that environment, you talk about trying to find a collaborative atmosphere. If email is the collaborative atmosphere, is that I assume it's fine, but it's just I don't know if I've ever seen it work. Seems like that may also be the case of somebody trying to make sure their documentation is in order, but that's a different story.
And you wonder who's BCC'd on it, and you wonder. So here's the thing with that example that I just provided. When I received the email, I picked up the phone.
Okay.
Because if I responded, and depending on her mood that day, depending on her perspective, who knows how she would have perceived that. It's like, have we ever read an email on a Monday and went, God, that person's out to lunch. What were they thinking? And then you read the same email again on Thursday and you went, oh no, I was out to lunch.
Yeah.
It was my perspective. It was my mood that morning. Right. So I think if you need to verbalize and articulate your words in an email, I'm a big believer in writing things out. Save it in a draft. Make sure you save it in draft. Sometimes even just getting the act of writing it out. And then when you start to see some of the things that you wrote, like, whoa, that was a bit offside. But we're quick to hit send, right? Yeah. So a couple comments here in the chat too, I think, that speak to it. And there's too much that can be misinterpreted in tone. 100%. There's no tone in an email. Email has no emotional attachment. You can tell email is not working when you do not get a reply. Absolutely. But I like, writing the email, not sending it. Goes back to your comment around preparation. Yes.
Right. So another question that we had from the last time we were here: what role does influence play in conflict? And I'm interpreting this question a little bit as, can somebody with a high degree of influence win the conflict? Right.
Well, to answer the question, influence plays a huge role in conflict. Again, if we're person C, and depending on my response, and I'm in a position of influence, whether it's a titled or not, then I can greatly impact what person A and B are thinking, feeling, experiencing, positively and negatively. I might even come back to you, Craig. How would you see that question in terms of how does influence play?
I think for me, I kind of go to the aspect of if you have a conflict between two individuals, one who may be highly charismatic and able to wield a great deal of influence, perhaps more on the competing or side, right? Versus, I think it also it ties into that conflict style. I think if
Yeah.
you're going to have somebody who's very influential with a competing style, you've got the potential there for somebody to continually steamroll all their conflict, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's an interesting one for me. I like this, Shane, you got a great comment here. Obviously with Hockey Canada always asks to employ the 24-hour rule before you send your email. That is brilliant.
Yes.
My old pharma world, we used to call that a delayed onset of action. It had a product that usually took 24 to 48 hours to start taking effect, and we'd call that the delayed onset of action. So, have a delayed onset of action before you hit send. I like that.
And adding to that, do not put the person's name in the to field, just in case. Just in case. I've made the mistake. It was awful. It was awful.
Oh.
I was just venting, write it out, and for some reason, the person's name was still in the to, and you know where this is going. It was
Absolutely.
Yeah. So hence
that
why
that sounds like a chapter in a book, Gina.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah. And Brian, please, we can wait until tomorrow. That's good. If you wait till tomorrow and respond to my Oilers jersey, you may be able to have bragging rights depending on how tonight goes. So that's fantastic. Another question that we had from last time, and I think this comes back to people versus problems per se, but how do you address people who consistently say negative things and attempt to sidetrack meetings?
So I guess I'd be curious more about, is it all the time or is it just in a meeting? So if it's just in a meeting, then we need to set meeting norms. If we don't have meeting norms in place, again, some of the norms at the start of a meeting, and have the team set the norms. They shouldn't come from you as the leader. It should come from the group, right? We all own the norms. And so let's, respectful language, not interrupting, making sure, we have equal voice share within the meeting, that we're addressing the issues and not sort of talking about them when we leave the meeting. If it's an issue where one person is consistently being negative, saying negative things in the session, well, maybe that's as a leader when we go and have a conversation. My experience of you in the last 3 meetings that we've had, be specific, is this. Can you help me understand? Help me understand what's going on?
Yeah, that's fair. I like that. My experience of you. That's a very good line. It's right up there with energy.
It sounds very woo-woo.
Yeah, it does.
And it works.
Yeah,
right? It works.
I'm sure it does. My team would probably laugh at me if I started saying that, but that's okay. Most of them are on the call today, so they'll know where I got it from. Krista, good comment here. I think it's important to let the person wade in the problem, but it's our job to not let them wallow in it. Oh, I like that. Let them vent and find solutions. That's good. Another question I think that may be timely, and we may start seeing more of it here as the great resignation, reshuffle, and so on happens. But how do you handle a situation where a conflict situation where your junior is your elder? Right? Not that, I guess in theory, not that it really should matter, but I think there's probably some perception around this. So it's an interesting question.
It's a really interesting question. I guess the first place I go to is, what is the belief there? Is it the belief that because they're older, because they've maybe been at the company longer than me, they know more, or I feel so there's something there, right?
Yeah.
And again, having a conversation. I'm only as successful in my role as because of the team. Right. And so with that, I want your knowledge. I want your expertise. I don't have nearly as much experience as you do, based on age, based on having a longer time in the business. And with that, we utilize it. Right. Sometimes it can feel really intimidating. But maybe a couple of things. I think, self-reflection. Why is it intimidating? Because people are people.
Yeah.
Right? Getting to know the person, understanding their expertise, what they're bringing to the table. So it's a great question. I think it takes some self-reflection. Going back to that communication agreement, talking about expectations, talking about strengths. Your role as a leader isn't to know it all. It's not to have the superhero cape and solve all the problems. It's to have your people's back, right? Be in service to your people. And so that would be your role. Your roles are different.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one, right? And even if you do know the answer and can solve it in the moment, should you?
Yeah.
Again, that's very broad, and I realize there's 1,000 different directions that one could go, but I think it's again, it comes back to timing and time to results, and let's get work done versus allowing somebody to take the time to find the answer. So we're closing in on our time, Gina, and you had a couple of great things I know you prepared. And I was thinking about the to-do lists. I really like that. And that might be a great place to start moving into the last couple of thoughts. So, but this to-do list, I really like this.
I do too. And again, so first thing I would say is you are the expert in your world. Right. So some of these core principles will apply, but if you need to adjust as you see fit. First of all, again, don't ignore it. We need to address the conflict. We can use it, use that conflict situation to bring out more information in people, getting curious. Focus on the learning. Again, it's a learning conversation. It's not a difficult one. Find a way to make it safe. So how do I create safety? Right. So lack of safety leads to more conflict. So find a way to keep it safe, create that psychological safety. With that, maintain boundaries. That goes back to what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Let's talk about norms, how we're going to discuss, how we're going to communicate with one another. Respect each other's differences. It's a great thing when we have differences. This is how we get better ideas. And again, lean into the diverse set of skills of our team, and identify the goal. Identify the goal for not only managing conflict, but strategies specific to that identified goal. So staying on task and the issue at hand. Soft on personalities, tough on task. I have to add this one in before we wrap up.
Yeah.
I love this slide. I can't say this enough. People want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be respected. And there's no greater compliment as a leader than someone telling you that you helped bring out the best in me and your leadership helped me to grow. And so remembering empathy, I think that should be on the to-do list. I'll add that for another time, but putting empathy on that to-do list.
Perfect.
As we start to wrap up, so are we on to our? I'm looking at our time.
No, we're right there, and I was going to throw a couple reminders in the chat again for folks. If you haven't followed us yet on LinkedIn, please do so. Another session coming up June 9th. June 9th is going to be a little bit different. It's with Jordy McPherson and Kathy Osterlin from Wajax Tundra. And then, of course, June 16th, we will be live and in person. If you want to see Gina live on stage. But yeah, absolutely. Please, Gina, just pop back to your, I want you to be able to wrap up with your one big idea, your two strategies.
Big idea, use it. Use the conflict, embrace the opportunity to become more self-aware, work through the conflict on your team, and use conflict as an energy source, right? It can be an energy source where we can become more innovative, more creative, more productive. 2 applied strategies: acknowledge and ask a question. I'm a huge fan of this. So acknowledge what's going on, acknowledge that person, then ask questions, get curious. Great leaders ask great questions. And then 3 questions to ask yourself. So asking yourself again, am I ready? Am I ready and willing to address it? Does my team feel safe enough to engage in productive conflict? Are we having good conversations? Is there enough trust? And can I leverage the conflict? So how can we leverage this so we can get better? You know, and honing these skills takes time, it takes practice. But you know, the decrease in frustration and negativity is well worth the effort, without a question. So
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate you making this work. I know we were trying to find time in your schedule, and this is fantastic. I appreciate everybody on the line joining us. I am amazed I got through this without calling you Jenny. So I am so happy about that one for me. But thank you, Gina, and everybody that's joined us. Thank you. Have a fantastic day. Final word to you, Gina.
I just want to say thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your morning to share space with us. And I wish you nothing but continued success in conflict.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.